just want to really impress upon you that I really did take for granted the way we use our intuitive abilities until that moment. When I meet somebody who says, I'm really skeptical, I'm just grateful that they're saying that. I think we're supposed to be skeptical. I think we're supposed to question. I want to tell you the story about my horse Honey and when she scolded me. And when I say she scolded me, I don't mean she pinned her ears or swished her tail or gave me a dirty look. I mean, I heard her yell at me. This was the most profound experience I had had up to that point when it came to animal communication. Prior to that, I had taken it for granted. I just somehow knew that animals knew how I felt. I somehow knew that they understood me. I somehow knew how they felt, and I somehow knew what they needed and what they were trying to tell me. And it wasn't just a knowing, but it was something that, again, I took for granted. I didn't really dissect it. I didn't try to understand it. It was just something that happened, and it was amazing. And I really want to share some of those stories with you as well. But this was the one that pushed me. It pushed me past the point that I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was so profound, so undeniable. But it was also the beginning of one of the hardest periods of my life. I've had several challenges since then, but I was young. I was a senior in college. And it was the beginning of my first challenge like this. And so everything was new to me. You know, you compare everything you go through to previous experiences you've been through. So up to this point, I had not really experienced the kind of loss that I was about to experience in the coming weeks. So while this was a gift to have this particular experience with my horse Honey, and I will always cherish it and be grateful for it, it was also the beginning of a hard time for me. So I'll back up and just start with reminding you that I eventually graduated with my accounting degree, but at the time I was a senior in college and I had just finished an internship with an accounting firm, and we were on spring break. And so I had a couple of days before I had to head back up to college. And it was a beautiful sunny morning, so I went out to the barn to get my horse Honey and load her up and put her on a trailer to drive over to a friend's house, and we were just gonna go trail riding, nothing big. But I was excited about it, having the day off and the extra time to be with her. When school was in session, it was often hard to get out to see her and ride her as much as I wanted because of all the studying. So I drove out to the barn one morning to go load her up on the trailer, and I noticed that she had been turned out in the round pen, which wasn't really usual for that time of day, but I didn't really think much about it. What I noticed was that she was laying down, which I know she doesn't do at that time of day normally. She's usually being very social with other horses, or she's eating hay or taking a little nap, but not laying down. And there was nobody else at the barn, so I immediately was concerned because there was nobody that had been watching her to be able to tell me why she was laying down or anything that they had seen wrong. So I raced to the round pen and went in, and she greeted me and she stood up, but it was obvious that she didn't feel well. I could just tell that she looked lethargic and just didn't look like she felt that well. And her head was kind of hanging, and I just had this huge pit in my stomach. I just had this feeling something was wrong. And I looked her over and I couldn't see any signs of injury or snake bite or even distress. She wasn't really like sweaty or anything. She just looked like she felt bad, like when you kind of have a cold, you know? So I started to go call the vet, and I was gonna have the vet just come check her out because at this point, I guess she was close to 21 years old. And I just knew not to take any risks. And as I started leaving the round pen to go call, she started to lay down to roll again. Well, I, over my years of experience with being around a lot of horses, have seen a lot of horses go through colic. And a lot of them don't make it when they colic. It's a condition that is very dangerous for horses. It's very difficult to treat, especially if you don't catch it in time. And the last thing you want your horse to do if they might be colicking is to roll. So what you try to do is walk them around and keep them from thrashing their legs out and rolling. So when I saw her start to roll, to lay down again and to roll, I did what you should never do. And having been around horses my whole life, I knew better. But I went into pure panic mode and I tried to get between her and the ground. And you never try to get between a horse and the ground. When they're trying to lay down, don't do it, just trust me. But I mean, common sense tells you, right? They're much bigger, they're stronger. On top of the fact that she was much bigger and stronger than me, she couldn't see me because she was facing away from me. I went to stop her and I put my hands on her shoulder just as she hit the ground and started to roll, and she pinned me on the ground as she was rolling. And I couldn't even yell because of the way that she hit me. Her legs came up over and she was gonna roll all the way over. And I remember it was like time froze because her hooves were in the air, all four, about to come down on me. And I just knew I was a goner. I was like, this is it. I'm about to die. And then I saw, it was like time stood still for a minute. And I saw in the corner of her eye, I could see the whites of her eye. That's how underneath and close I was to her. I saw her see me and go like that. I mean, she went, her whole body just like froze midair, and she went back the other way. And I could breathe again. But I had no air in me at all. She stood up and I was on the ground. And I tried to stand up, but couldn't because I was still out of air. I was just kneeling on the ground, literally just kneeling there with my hands like this. And this is when she came charging at me. And she took her whole head, her whole face, and rammed her nose into my chest and lifted me off the ground. And while she did that, I heard these words. And it was, I can't even really explain where I heard it. I just heard, "Are you okay?" And then I was like this, and I had no air at all. And when I say I heard her say that, I mean, it was in my head, but it was loud, like shouting. And then I heard, "What were you thinking?" That's when I felt like all the blood was just draining out of my face, and I was just frozen. And I could not believe what I had just heard. And we stood there just glaring at each other. And she was heaving and breathing so hard, and I was still trying to catch my breath, and I was just glaring at her. And there was no one around, and all I could think was, what just happened? It was just, again, one of those moments in time where time stands still. Then all of a sudden, I remembered, wait a minute, I think she's colicking. And I just ran out of the arena, totally freaked out by what just happened, by the fact that I almost died, by the fact that she's probably colicking, and she just yelled at me. And I don't know how she did it, but I know that she was yelling at me. And so I called the vet, and I was just freaked out. He said, "Don't worry, I can be there in about 20 minutes or so." And he came out, and by this time I had caught my breath, and I didn't know what to think about it. I was so worried about her, and I was just walking her around on the lead line, and I just kept thinking, what was that? What was that? I don't know what that was. And then we both calmed down by the time he got there, and he came and he took her vitals and checked her out, and he was like, "Devon, I think she's fine. Maybe she's just having an off morning, but boy, on the phone, you sounded like you'd seen a ghost." I just remember thinking, I think I might have heard a ghost. I couldn't explain where it came from. But he was looking at me like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "You look so pale, and I think she's fine." So I calmed down, and I was like, well, thank you so much for coming out. And he said, well, keep an eye on her and everything. So he left, and I ended up not taking her for a ride that day. I just, hung out with her and made sure she was feeling better. And she seemed to be doing better at that point, but I just couldn't shake that feeling. I just really, I knew I had hurt her. So we hung out together. She seemed fine. She kind of did seem to go back to normal. As far as her normal happy self. And once I was sure she was okay, I left for a while to go run errands and do whatever. And then that evening, I was sitting having dinner with my parents, and I just felt this pit in my stomach again. And I was like, she is not okay. I know she's not okay. And I know what I heard this morning. What is she trying to tell me? So I talked my dad into going out with me to the barn because it was dark at this point, and I was kind of nervous to go out there by myself. We went out there, and sure enough, she was laying down again. And this time she was sweating and panting. This time she was definitely colicking. She was actively in a lot of pain. I ended up driving her an hour and a half away to a vet clinic that night and getting her admitted to an emergency vet clinic room. And we had a lot more experiences over the next couple weeks, but we ended up determining within 24 hours of that incident that she had a late stage of stomach cancer, and that there was pretty much nothing they could do for her at this point other than just try to treat the symptoms. And the reason she was colicking is because obviously it hurt. We were able to buy some time with her because we kept her from colicking and making the condition worse. But over the next couple of weeks, her condition deteriorated rapidly. She ended up having to have emergency surgery. She ended up getting a strangulated lipoma around her small colon, which is basically causing her not to be able to function properly, her bodily functions. I went out and spent 2 or 3 times a day. I went out to the vet clinic and just hung out with her and spent every moment I could with her. And I'm so grateful for that. But in the end, she told me when she was ready to go. And I was sitting at home. I was studying. I had a pretty big exam coming up. And she was just like, I'm ready. It's time. And I felt this just urge to go help her. And I remember looking out the window and thinking, okay, honey, I'm coming. I'm going to get you out of this pain. So our last moments together were just some of the most intense, loving, amazing moments. And she told me she was waiting for me to come. I didn't understand that. Why was she waiting for me? And what does that mean? And then the vet tech came in and told me that during the night, her fever had gotten so high that they didn't know how she was still alive. I was at first furious because I had told them, please do not let her suffer. I will come out in the middle of the night. I will do whatever it takes to keep her from hurting and suffering. And nobody called me. So when I found out that she had gone through that all night and that she had been in so much pain, I knew what she meant by I was waiting for you. And it ended up being a very peaceful passing for her. But what I also remember is how still everything got at the moment that she was passing. And then all of a sudden, every bird on the property flew up off the ground and into the sky. I had an image in my mind of her getting up and running away. And I just felt like it was acknowledgement that she was free of the pain in her body. During those 2 weeks that she was deteriorating, I think I was going through an advanced boot camp of animal communication. I felt like she was passing pieces of wisdom onto me. I felt like she was teaching me. But it was one of those life-changing things where you actually question the path you're on because it's so intense. I think I was also just so present with her, which was such a gift. I was so grateful I was able to bring her to my school for her last few years because they had an amazing vet clinic there. And so I was able to be with her while she was undergoing treatment. And I can't explain to you enough how spiritual those few weeks were for me. I feel like she was just easing me into the process. I mean, I was pretty naive. I thought that my kids were gonna ride her one day. I thought, they were gonna get to kind of grow up on her. I mean, I've seen horses live a long time, and at that point, my pony Easter, which I'd love to tell you about sometime, she lived to be 38. So anyways, I think that that's kind of the end of the story. I think I'm gonna wrap it up there. The main thing I want to share about when Honey scolded me was how crystal clear it was. There was no denying it. There was no other human being around. It wasn't ethereal, like somebody from beyond. It was her. And she was glaring at me. And she was looking at me like, what were you thinking? Let's just say she was mad at me. Honestly, I was really mad at myself, but I think she was more mad. It was like she was like, this is not how I raised you. And we'd had a lot of experiences together where she was the one that made the dangerous decision. Just remind me to tell you the wash rack story, because that was when I understood telepathy with animals. But I just want to really impress upon you that I really did take for granted the way we use our intuitive abilities until that moment. And I also thought it was something that happened to me in my mind. And that's where I feel like it's so important that people understand that they can do this too, and that we were all born with these abilities. I think there's a lot of people out there that are really good at being open to this type of stuff. They're kind of born open to it. And I admire those people so much. But I was not one of those people. I was pretty closed off. The idea that I could hear something like that wasn't believable. And I'm so grateful that I went through all the skeptical periods of my life that I went through. I do enjoy scientific facts. I do enjoy research. I needed some analytical sides to ease into this. A lot of people who come into believing in our abilities to connect like this, some of them have death experiences. They actually die and then come back, and then they believe. Or they almost die, or something happens that is just so in your face, like your horse scolding you. That's a good thing. But I know there's a way that we can connect without waiting around for these experiences to happen, because I've done it. I've tracked it, and it's happened over and over and over again. When you have experiences like that, you just know. And sometimes there just aren't enough words to properly do it justice. And when I meet somebody who says, I'm really skeptical of you or what you're talking about, or whether there really is anything out there, I'm just grateful that they're saying that, I think we're supposed to be skeptical. I think we're supposed to question. And I fall back on that a lot because I feel like with all the ways there are to connect, if you go through life not wanting to try to connect with your intuitive abilities intentionally, you're still connecting. You're connecting through your animals, through your church, through your children, through art, anything creative. I think that's why it was such a great place for me, was to be with my animals. That's where I felt the most at home and where I felt the closest to God. And so I think that creative channel was open there, and that's why it was so available to me. Anyways, I'm so grateful to share that story with you. I hope it came across well because it really will always be one of the most profound experiences in my life. So thank you for listening. I love sharing these stories, and I can't wait to share more with you. See you next time. Bye.